Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Alex and today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different for my channel. I was talking to my partner Keaton this morning and I was telling him about how I really needed to film my February wrap up and do my March TBR, and those are always separate videos, and I was hemming and hawing about which one was going to come out first and when I was going to do them, and he looked at me and he was like, why don't you just combine them? Which I had never thought about doing. As silly as that sounds, it just didn't cross my mind, and it's honestly a fantastic idea, so I decided to do that for this video. Hopefully you are going to enjoy it. I'm going to begin with my 5-star predictions for March, which was something I was inspired to do by my friend Kat at Kat's Novel Adventures. She did 5-star predictions for February and it looked like a ton of fun, so I was like, I'm going to do that as well. And then I'm going to end the video with my reviews and recommendations for the books that I read in February. So let me know down in the comments as I go through the video how you like this format, or if you would like me to go back to kind of the 2-video system, because I'm open to feedback. Kicking it off with my first 5-star prediction is Less by Andrew Sean Greer. Now, I am carrying this over from February because I didn't get to it, and I really feel like this Pulitzer Prize winner is going to be an exceptional read for me specifically. This is the story of Arthur Less, who is this middle-aged gay man. He's a failed novelist. His ex is getting married and has invited Arthur to the wedding, and Arthur has decided to go. And it's going to turn into this kind of around the world in 80 days story. I have a feeling it's really going to tug at my heartstrings. It might make me cry. I love hard-hitting books like that, and I am also anticipating it's kind of about finding yourself in middle age, which I am not middle-aged, so I might not necessarily be able to relate to that, but I do love stories about people figuring out who they are and finding happiness in their life, so feeling really good about this one. My next choice was selected because of my friend and subscriber Miss Starbuck, who wanted me to read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. The discourse around this book is quite interesting because of how polarizing it is. The people who love this book, and most people did, it has very high ratings, it's a popular book. Most people loved it, but the people who didn't like it tended to hate it pretty badly, and I have no idea where I'm going to fall in that, but just based off of the description of the book, based off of what I've heard about it, I have a feeling that this is the type of book for me. Though there is a trigger warning for suicide, I don't have any idea how that's going to play into the story. I just know that it's there, so I wanted to throw that out there for any of you who might be interested in reading this. It is the story of Nora Seed, who finds herself in the Midnight Library, which is a place between life and death, and it gives people the opportunity to follow paths untaken. So she shows up at the library and she is given this opportunity to go and relive her life, to experience the choices that she didn't take, to try to build the perfect existence for herself. And of course this alters her relationships with the people around her. It creates lasting impacts for people that she had never met before, and it also, I guess, endangers the library in some way, so there's kind of a race against time element, and I believe it's seeking to answer the question, how does one live a good life, or what does it mean to live a good life? This is another book that I feel like is going to be hard-hitting. It's probably going to make me cry. I'm one of those weird people that I actually like stories that make me cry, not cry in the sense of what I'm reading is super traumatic and this is like emotionally devastating for me to read, but crying in the sense of I get to watch these characters grow and change and experience things that they haven't before, maybe, love or loss. And I'm a very sappy person, and I like it when other people discover things about themselves. Up next is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This book in particular, I have been extremely excited to read. This was one of the books that I got for Christmas. I have been chomping at the bit to read it, and Kat and I are going to be doing a buddy read for this story. And if I had to guess, of all of the books that I am going to be reading in March, I feel that this one is going to be my absolute favorite. So if I rank them, which I probably will now that I think about it, I rank them at the end of March and tell you all how I felt about each one or where they fell in my 5-star predictions, I think this one's going to be at the top. This is the story of a woman named Tova who just recently lost her husband, and she decides to take a night janitorial position at a local aquarium. And in that aquarium is a giant Pacific octopus named Marcellus. And Marcellus really doesn't like humans. He views them as his captors. He doesn't want anything to do with them until he befriends Tova, and he ends up learning from her that she lost her son 30 years ago. He was 18 years old. He was out on this boat and he went missing, and nobody knows what happened to him. And Marcellus decides that he is going to help solve the mystery of what happened to her son. Cannot even begin to tell you how excited I am to read this, so I'm definitely going to be getting to it sooner rather than later. Hopefully by now you are aware that I am doing a read-along this month with my friends Nicole from Noteworthy Fiction, Alex from Alex Black Reads, and Jessica from This Kiwi of The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I can honestly tell you that I'm not entirely sure if this is a 5-star prediction because I am not somebody who typically reads classics. I am quite intimidated by classics, honestly, but I felt like this would be a really great one to start with, and so many people love this book. So I'm going into it with positivity. My fingers are crossed. I'm like, okay, it's going to be a good time. And it's going to honestly be a good time just for the fact that I'm reading it with other people. Even if I don't end up liking it all that much, the discussions that we're going to have, I think, are going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to be having a live show for that at the end of the month. So hopefully you would be interested in reading this book along with us. I think it's going to be a great time. We also have a read along on Storygraph that you can join down in the comment box below, if you feel like it. And of course, this is the story of Dorian Gray, a young man who sells his soul to the devil because he wants to remain young and beautiful forever. On the other hand, he's a really terrible person. And I will leave it at that. Lastly, for this section of the video is the book that I'm currently reading, which is The Dark Forest by Session Leo, and this is the sequel to The Three-Body Problem. Because it is a sequel, I can't tell you anything about it. I can't even give you the description of the book because it would completely spoil a huge reveal that happens in the first story, which leads me to a predicament. And I'm gonna put this out there to you all because I want to hear your feedback on it. Most sci-fi books that I end up reading, I give an individual review. That's something that I love to do, but it's tricky with a series because any of you who maybe are interested in reading the first book, you watched my first review and you're like, oh, I'll get to that eventually. You're not going to be able to watch my review for the second one until you read the first one, and I have no idea how many people that would appeal to, so I kind of have two options. I can either put my review for this in one of my collective wrap-ups like I'm doing in this video and kind of give like a brief synopsis of how I feel about it, or I can do an in-depth review. I'm very torn on what to do because this is the first time that I'm in this situation on my channel, so please let me know what you think about that. I would really appreciate it. And now I get to tell you about the books that I read in February, and I'm going to begin with Educated by Tara Westover. Educated is a memoir that explores Tara Westover's upbringing in an unorthodox Mormon family in Idaho. She puts a blurb at the very beginning of the book stating that her story is neither praise nor condemnation of Mormonism as a whole, and she didn't want anybody to take it that way. So if you know anything about Mormonism or you are Mormon yourself, just know that going into the book. Her family would definitely be categorized as extremists. They're people that don't believe in medicine, they don't believe in going to the hospital, they're doomsday preppers, they have alternate interpretations of the Bible, they don't believe in sending their kids to school. I mean, there's just so many things that are very different about them than mainstream Mormon culture. I can honestly say that her childhood is one of the most heartbreaking things that I have ever read. She had to deal with violence from her brother, who was physically and emotionally abusive. She witnessed horrible, tragic family accidents that happen. We're talking about brain injuries and severe burns that are described in great detail in the book. And I just can't imagine being like 8 years old and having parents that care so little about your health or well-being that if you were to be traumatically injured, you wouldn't even be allowed to go to the hospital. The title of the book stems from the fact that Tara didn't set foot in a classroom until she was 17 years old. She literally put herself in college. She studied independently for the ACT, scored a high enough score to be able to get into Brigham Young University, and then all of a sudden she's in the educated world around people who are completely different from her. She has no social skills. She doesn't understand anything about social norms. It was so illuminating to witness what a lifestyle could be like for kids who don't go to school, and then what a shock it would be to them to then go out into the world and see the way that everybody else has been living this entire time. I will say probably my only criticism of the book is that the second half, when she goes to school, felt slower than the first half talking about her childhood, but honestly I think that's just because her childhood was so traumatic, and you end up reading it and you're kind of just gripped by the fact that no person could possibly have gone through all this stuff, but she did. She is an incredibly talented and gifted author, and the fact that she didn't even start learning grammar until she was in college just puts me completely to shame. I mean, I could honestly never have done what she did, and I know that for a fact. And I am giving this book 4.5 stars. I would highly recommend that you read it. Up next is going to be Homegoing by Ya Jossi, and this is more of a story of lineage than any one specific character. The story begins with two half-sisters who have never met before, and they live in Africa. And one sister is married off to a white slaver, and she gets to stay in Africa. She lives in a castle there, and she overall has a much better life than her sister, who is sold off to slavery and is shipped to the United States to work on the plantations. The story covers 8 generations and 16 perspectives over 300 pages. So you can imagine that you're not really spending much time with any individual character. You're talking an average of less than 20 pages. So I would really describe this book as being a series of vignettes and snapshots from somebody's life. So you might not necessarily get to know them fully as a person, but you get an idea of the person that they are, the time period that they're living in, and the struggles that they are dealing with at that time. What I think is really fun about this book is it's one of those that you honestly could read it a couple different ways. So you could read it cover to cover, which is the way that I read it, or you could go through and read one lineage and then go back and read the other one, saving the last chapter for absolute last of all of it. And it would be really easy to do because the beginning of the book actually has a family tree with all of the characters that you are going to be following through these 8 generations. I have a feeling that that would probably provide kind of an interesting perspective, or it might enhance the story in some way rather than bouncing back and forth, but I don't know. If you decide to read this book and you choose to read it that way, let me know, because I think that would be pretty cool. Homegoing gave me the opportunity to experience perspectives that I had never heard from before. Now, I know because of our history textbooks that at the time of the slave trade, that in Africa there were tribes that dominated others. They would go and they would raid villages, they would capture people, and they would bring them back and they would sell them off to the white slavers to be shipped all over the world to work on different farms and plantations. I had never read a book that showed the perspective of one of the slavers and what that did to their community and the way that they were viewed by the other tribes around them. And that was really interesting. Honestly, all of the perspectives were pretty well written. I would just say that some of them were more intriguing than others, or I felt like I was learning more sometimes than with other perspectives. And one of the things that I didn't know about was when the slaves were released in the United States, that they would sometimes be captured by police officers and charged with petty crimes, where they would then be sent off to mining camps to have to work for, 6 to 10 years in these horrible conditions, like incredibly unsafe, very dirty. They're likely to die. And if they did die, then they were just replaced by the next convict. And those black men that were captured for these petty crimes were having to work alongside these white convicts who were charged with much more heinous crimes. And we were talking about murder compared to, oh, well, you just looked at somebody the wrong way. And I had no idea that that was a part of the US's history. I'm honestly not surprised, but I'm glad that I know about it now. And that was one of the most engaging parts of the book to me, and something that I felt like was very worthwhile to read. I really appreciate Homegoing for teaching me more about the country in which I live. Really, the only thing that dragged this book down was the fact that you don't spend that much time with any individual character, but I otherwise would still recommend this, and I gave it 4 stars. The Three Body Problem by Session Leo was the first book that I finished in February, and I also did an extensive review on it. So if you're interested, you should definitely go check that out. But if you're not and you want the short version, this is a philosophical sci-fi mystery in which we are trying to discover the reason behind a series of suicides of prominent scientists and how that relates to a mysterious video game called Three Body. I thought that this was engaging, it was fun, I love the science, I love the philosophy, I love the concepts presented in here. You do not get strong characters with the Three Body Problem, and that drove many readers crazy because most people when they read a book, they don't expect to read one where the characters are shallow. You know, you're only getting a couple character traits, maybe 1 or 2 interests of any individual character in this book, but that's because it's written like old sci-fi, like classic sci-fi, and so that was something that didn't bother me, but it might bother you. Keep that in mind. But overall, I gave this 5 stars. Bunny by Mona Awad is another book that got its own review, so you could go check that out if you want. This is the story of Samantha, who is going to Warren University to get her MFA in fiction, and she is a part of an all-female cohort, and she is the only one in her cohort that is not part of a clique called the Bunnies, who she absolutely despises. Mona Awad does a great job of creating atmosphere and tension in this book. I really liked certain elements of it, but ultimately felt like there were parts that were repetitive, that were unnecessary. I think that it would have been better as a novella or maybe even a short story, but that's just me, and I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. It also was not the weirdest book that I've ever read. Everybody wants to talk about how weird this book was. I have read books that are way weirder, so, you know, take that for what you will. So those are all of my 5-star predictions and all of the books that I read in February. I really hope that you enjoyed this video because I enjoyed making it. And as always, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, that you all stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.